get started. Welcome, Anika. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I will let you introduce yourself, and then, as always, just guys, feel free to ask any questions with voice or also in the chat. And thank you.
I hope you hear me. Okay. First question, do you ever use Discord, Anika? No, I don't. So I'm learning how to use this thing. It's fun. Yeah, thank you, Nicole, for having me. I'm a writer and curator based in Berlin. I run, together with the team, Expanded Art, which is a gallery and an online platform at the same time. We present yesterday's pioneers and today's avant-garde, and I studied art history and German literature in Heidelberg. And then by accident, I got into everything I'm doing today. So I never planned to be a curator. I always wanted to be a writer, which I am still. And yeah, I curated a few museum shows. And because a museum director, I really liked my column in one of Germany's biggest art magazine. And then I thought, yeah, well, why not give it a try to curate a museum show? And it by accident went super well. And that's why I kept curating. And I guess if you write about social media and digital art and art, at some point you can't get around NFTs. So yeah, I guess that's how we ended up here today. And I enjoy my life in the NFT space, definitely. But yeah, I also have a traditional artwork background. So if you have any questions about that, happy to also answer anything traditional artwork related. So, questions, anyone?
Hello, Anika. My name is Anton. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I would like to know a little bit of how NFT is seen in the traditional art world in the world, because now for me it was this journey in digital art. It started with NFT and in the Twitter spaces, and it always really interesting for me how it's perceived in the art world, and I'm also interested in what problems are there, why this can be challenging for NFT to get to traditional spaces and in museum, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you. That's a very good question. I mean, the interesting thing is when I studied art history, and now that I, like over the past year, started thinking back, if I have learned anything about digital art, no, I actually didn't. They never spoke about digital art, right? I think the one name I heard when I studied was Namjoon Paik. But everyone knows about, the history of painting and, concept art, bad painting, all of these things. Because there wasn't a market for this kind of art, and it was sort of niche. Then digital art is always connected to technologies, and very early on, if artists wanted to have access to technologies, they somehow really needed to know someone at a university, be at a university themselves, having access to funds, and so on and so on. So before NFTs, it was actually really difficult for most people to create a digital art long term, because they couldn't sell it. And an artist like Lee Mulliken, who's one of the pioneers in America of digital art, he just, he had a painting background and he just kept going. So because there's a lack of, I think, understanding of the history of the medium, and suddenly there's this big hype, I guess it's like, if you don't know the history and then start looking at these things, and as I've mentioned, everyone knows the history of painting, basically, because we learned that in school, with our, when we were kids, maybe even in kindergarten, we went to a museum. And then at school, we always went to a museum. So from very early on, we learned about painting. So we're not confused when we see a bad painting. We know what that, we know the whole history of the medium. But when it comes to digital art and someone sees meme art or GIFs or glitch art, or anything post-internet art, they don't know the history of the medium, so it's quite tricky to understand what is good and bad, what are criteria for good and bad and interesting art, for historically relevant art. So I think the art world, traditional art world, first of all, has to catch up with the NFT space and the curators, artists, and also collectors who have been in this like for a couple of decades now. I guess that's where the problems arise. And then, because when the hype started, everything so much was basically about the market, and then all these millions that have been made, and even now that the press is back to writing about NFTs, what are they writing about? Some auction records again about a goose that sold for, what was it, 6.2 with hammer fees at Sotheby's.
We lost you, Anika.
NFTs, basically digital art, and then I think.
We lost you for a bit just after you talked about the goose.
Oh, how's that possible? Because I didn't move. Do you hear me again?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I basically tried to sum it up. I said, well, the main issue, I think, and challenge also for all of us, is that there's a lack of understanding of the history of the medium, and that's definitely digital art. And I think we can also ask ourselves, because all of us, like right now we're on Discord, which is fine because it's a residency program, so we don't want to, have a big audience here. But when it comes to speaking about exhibitions and all of these things, we're in this sort of closed circle on Twitter. So what could we also do to be more accessible for the traditional art world? I guess that's what I ask myself, like, every day. How can we do a better job? And I don't like the word bridging, but just to be more accessible, to help more with education around the history of the medium, and so on and so on. Did that answer your question?
Yes, yes. It's it. I just always try to understand it, and it makes me think that I also need to dig into history of medium myself to be able to maybe talk sometime about it. But yeah, thanks. It was really great. Thank you.
There's a couple of questions from Emily that are typed, so I'm gonna just say the
Yeah,
first one.
currently checking.
Okay, cool. I'll go for it then.
Emily, great to have you here. 2 questions. I've seen talk of the importance of storytelling on your Twitter account and would love to hear about example of artist projects that told their story really well. Where at the moment do you find the best writing about digital art? Yesterday, was that yesterday? Time goes fast and sometimes slow. Yeah, I think yesterday or 2 days ago, I gave a workshop as part of the FX hash hackathon. And yeah, my workshop was about concept development, and that's basically, from my perspective, also as a writer, about storytelling and having a narrative. And you asked for examples. Who has done that well? And I think someone who has done it well, and I assume that's a project also all of you might have seen on Twitter and on art blogs, I would say Operator. Anya and Dija have done a pretty good job speaking about their project and being very careful about not announcing too early. And when they announced, it was a really complex project. I think it's 3 stages with the release on art blogs, then collectors get a second token, and then the third part of the NFT release is a performance in a museum. And I think they've done a great job explaining that project. But basically, what I meant with storytelling is, and the first question every artist, I think, has to ask themselves is, what are your goals? I mean, do you want to be successful in the traditional art world? Then, you would have to go to gallery openings, to museums, and actually go to these kind of events. I mean, if you want to be successful in the NFT space and just there, then what is success for you and the NFT space? And I think because NFTs are basically the market, success in the NFT space actually means selling. So I think in this case, you would have to spend more time on Twitter, and as you're doing right now in Discord, learning all about the culture and communication of all of these things. And once you start actually to work on a project, I think it's really important to first of all do research. I think it's very important to know the history of the medium or whatever. Like, for example, if we stick with the example of Operator, they've done a project that involves choreography, dance, performance, the body. So they've, and then also the aesthetics is like early 20th century, connected to, how can you code, for example, glass and the body. So yeah, they learned about the history. They looked at artists such as Ana Livia Cordero, and then, try to figure out how they can continue writing the story of, let's say, in this case, generative choreography. And that's also very important when it comes to your storyline, because I guess all of you want to be an artist of our time. And so, yeah, I think it's very important to have an understanding what the relevant questions are today. So once you've done your research, then you start basically thinking about the concept and about, how to tell that stories. And I guess how to tell that story of the project is, I think it's a good idea to get, if you're working on an NFT release, then in most cases there's not a curator working with you on this project. So I think it might be helpful to get a writer on board to help you, with writing the text about the project. Then you also have someone to speak with, and then I think it's very important to also get feedback from other people. Because sometimes one has an idea, and that's also for me as a writer, sometimes I have an idea, then I start putting it on a piece of paper, then I wrote the thing, and then maybe someone else reads it, important information is missing, they don't get a joke. That's always very important when you write a text, to be aware that, it's very hard to for people to understand if you make a joke in written form. I guess you're also aware that this happens on Twitter. So yeah, I think research, then writing, thinking about the storyline, and then working on that storyline, and then getting feedback. I think these are the three most important things when you work on a new project. And really do research, take the time, do research on the internet, that you're not surprised that this has been done 20 times before, and you're just, basically repeating someone's ideas, which can always happen. But if you do very thorough research, and speak with other people, curators, writers. I mean, on Twitter, you can always just ask a question and people will be happy to help. That's I think, the best part about the NFT space, that people are really supportive and help a lot. And I guess, Nicole, that's also the idea of the residency program, to really help and support each other, because all of us are building something new together.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, where at the moment do you find the best writing about digital art, was the second question from Emily. I think, Right Click Save is doing an amazing job with the in-depth interviews, and then always getting experts on board from various fields to either do interviews or to really write thoroughly researched texts. And also Alex Estorik does a really great job on editing. Then there's Outland, which is the second online magazine from the NFT space. And then we on Expander.art also run an online magazine. And I really take the time to work with artists on the interview like we work with. And sometimes it takes up to a week to really take very good care of an interview, because you are aware of what you're working on, what what your career so far has looked like and everything. But keeping that in mind when putting something on a piece of paper, that's another story. And I guess it's always helpful to always remember that the person reading what you write, be it a concept, be it looking at a project, whatever, they don't know what you know. They basically always think that the person you try to reach doesn't know anything. And what do you need to say in an interview, write down in an interview, say in a Twitter space or wherever? It has to be like, you really need to explain everything. And you can't also, if you're not on Twitter, assume, and that's, for example, what I figured out, that people outside of the NFT space, they don't even know art blocks. I was on a panel in a museum, there were like 120 people, also high net worth collectors, and then I spoke about art blocks, and I saw that, you know, in their faces, oh, they not know art blocks, and then I asked, and actually and I was like, yeah, how many people know about art blocks? And no one knew art blocks. Yeah, always keep in mind that you need to explain everything if you would like to be understood. I hope that answered the question. Yeah. Yeah, Emily said we live in a bubble. I think that's right. Okay, great. She says I answered the question. Are there any more questions?
Ravel is typing, but also if anybody wants to unmute, feel free to do so and ask any questions that you have.
I was just thinking when you said about art blocks and that no one knew about it. I'm just interested in how people receive it and are they interested? What do they think about art blocks when they see? I mean, collectors and people from traditional art, from galleries. What their thoughts of it and. Do you see right now people engaging more in NFT space, not because of a market, but in interested of digital art and NFT world as a part of art world in general?
I think it's exactly the case what you say, right? People are interested in art, and then the medium is just the one thing. But yeah, I think it's very tricky to communicate outside, to reach people outside of Twitter, because how do you do that, right? I mean, you would have to have a physical location and be present somewhere that people can actually find you. That's why we have a a gallery space on Germany's on one of Berlin's biggest shopping streets that people just come across. And for me, it's always important to when, for example, we do a solo show, that we have half physical art, or maybe even only physical art, and then half digital or just one screen. And we've done, for example, a solo show with an artist called Hans Dehlinger. He's 82 years old, and it was plotter drawings. And people who came to the gallery, they didn't know that technology was involved, right? Because they just thought drawings, pen on paper, pencil on paper. So for them, it looked like a regular drawing. And then we explained to them, and they also asked how it was made, if he had made it by hand, and so on and so on. So I think, and then Hans Dehlinger one day said to me, because the show was on for 3 weeks, he came to the gallery every day and spent a lot of time there. And he was really happy because so many people came. Sometimes there were like 20, 30 people at once at the gallery. He was so happy, saying, oh, after all these years, like he started doing plotter drawings in the 80s, early 80s. He said, well, I had no clue and never anticipated that people, or expected that people would be so interested in plotter drawings. And then I said, Hans, wait 1 second. It's wonderful that so many people come and see the show. And we sold, like, by now close to 30 plotter drawings. And before that, he never sold any work. And I said, no, they're not interested in plotter drawings. They're interested in your art. Because it's a great concept. And there's also, optical illusions in there. He is an architect. So people are actually interested in art, and once there is a good concept and it's well executed, then they also don't mind if technology or code is involved, because most people aren't even aware that code can be a medium. We've done a show that was together with Verse early this, like, I think it was, January 2023, and it was titled Generative Abstraction, and we paired abstract paintings, like physical, generative art, and traditional art world collectors were not aware, most of them who came to the gallery, that code can be a medium. But they're really interested to learn. So I think the task is to go out there and actually reach people who are not part of the Twitter space. But I think what now happens through the NFT hype is, and it's great that we have so many events, right? NFT Europe, NFT NYC, NFT whatever, NFT in every single city. But, NFT Paris, I mean, the people who go there and the people who actually know this event is happening are people on Twitter. So I think it's up to us to be at the events, from the NFT space, but then also go to galleries, go to museums, be present, speak with people about the art and not NFTs, because what we're doing is digital art, and the NFT is basically the token and sort of like the proof of ownership on the blockchain. So I think there's also a job we have to do, and not just expect that the traditional art world comes to us. We can also just go to them and speak with them and tell them what we're doing, and not expect them to come on Twitter and to go to an online platform and participate in a Dutch auction. I guess at this point, when it comes to sales mechanism, it's already sometimes complicated for all of us who are sort of experts and daily on Twitter to sometimes understand the sales mechanism, because here's an allow list, and then there's whatever, you need to have this token to get access to this, and to get it cheaper, and you have to do this and that. So you have to jump through a lot of hoops to actually be able to collect the art. And I think that's also collectors at our gallery, they don't want to have to make the decision within like 2 minutes if they want to purchase an artwork or not, especially if it's not like 50 or 100 euro. And the interesting part is, if you say to someone from the traditional art world something costs like 50 or 100 euro, not even a regular edition in the traditional art world costs just 50 or 100 euro. Many collectors start collecting above 10,000. So I think there's a lot of challenges where we can also, do a better job, and be also more patient. Just we can just go out there and be present and speak about the art. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, 100%. Thanks.
There's a few questions in the chat. I'm going to read them out for you, Anika. So Pavel asks, would you have any recommendations for artists on how to learn to write about their art? I've always struggled with writing descriptions about my NFT projects. I appreciate the mention clues, but maybe there's something else an artist could work on to improve their writing.
I would say an artist is an artist and a writer is a writer. So I don't think that as an artist you need to be capable of writing about your own work, because if that would be your strength, I guess you might also be a writer, and that would be something you have enjoyed doing all your life and from very early on. I mean, when I speak with artists and do interviews, my first question is, when did you know you want to be an artist? And all of them say, yeah, when I was a kid. But when I was young, I knew I wanted to be a writer. I always loved writing. So I think, as an artist, I think be kind with yourself and be patient with yourself. Don't expect from yourself that you're good at everything that, seems to be part of the artistic practice, because I think writing about your own work is not part of your job as an artist. But yeah, if you would like to become better at writing, I mean, I've wrote a column for 6 years, and when I now look, and I run a student art magazine. We've done a print magazine in 2006. I ran the full editorial team for a couple of years. We were 10 people. I've done an internship at a pretty big newspaper, but I think it took me like 15 years to actually have the feeling that I'm achieving what I want if I start putting words on a piece of paper, or in this case on a screen. So I think learning how to write is really takes time. But if you want to learn to write, just like read. That's all you need to do. I've read so many books. I read every day, and I always look at structures of texts and sentences and all of these things. And the hardest part is, and that's why I also think it might be more helpful to get a writer on board, because the hardest part of writing a text is actually putting something complex into simple words in a way that everyone can understand what you try to say. And that really takes time. That also, I mean, if it looks like, oh, it's a text she has written in like 5 minutes, no, it's not. If it's like super simple, funny, entertaining, and so on, then it took me like minimum 1 night to write, and very likely 2 to 4 weeks to have the idea about the text. Like really, and at some point when I started being a writer, another friend of mine said, he's a journalist, he's a trained journalist, he said to me, well, you know, if you don't have an idea, just sit down and start writing. And then I actually tried that for like half a year, and it was like the worst experience of my entire life because it was so frustrating. I just sat there, stared at the, you know, a white sort of piece of paper on my screen, and nothing came to my mind. So I figured, no, that's how he, you know, has ideas and, you know, starts writing a text. For me, it didn't work. So what I figured out, for me, it helps walking around, doing something completely different, reading a lot, you know, just thinking about different things, speaking with people. And then at some point I will have an idea. And once I have the idea, I sit down, and then I'm still aware that the idea that I have in my head and the text that I've written in my mind doesn't work on a piece of paper. So yeah, writing is actually takes so much time, even for myself after like 15 years. Okay, I hope that answered your question. So yeah, just get a writer on board and read a lot. New Web3 artists for people to discover. Do you think curation is more important in the Web3 space? Okay, someone asked about curation and if it's more important in the Web3 space than in real life. So in real life, so it's funny. You can also ask ChatGPT. I've done that. I asked AI, what is the job of a curator? And it explained the job of a curator in a museum, and that's basically, you know, doing exhibitions, taking care of the collections, working with artists, and so on and so on. And then I asked ChatGPT for what's the job of or the role of a curator in the Web3 in the NFT space, and AI knew that a curator in the NFT space is actually what one would call a sales director at a gallery. You basically select artists that perform well on the market, because you don't have a choice, right? If you're a curator and you're invited by a marketplace to curate an exhibition, and all of the marketplaces you see are startups, so they need to deliver, they need to you know, have sales, because otherwise investors aren't going to be happy and they won't get more funding. That's basically selecting artists, in most cases, who perform well on the market. So I think curation is important, but in most cases in Web3, I would not call it curation, but selecting artists. And I think that's a different thing. But VerticalCrypto, for example, they're really curating exhibitions, and they're doing an excellent job doing that. Also, Nicole curates wonderful events with her team. So yeah. Carolina asked, how is the industry reacting to code-based generative artwork versus generative AI artwork? Is there a hierarchy? Okay, that's a question about AI versus generative art. I mean, the interesting part is we've also done a collaboration with VerticalCrypto Art, and we've shown the exhibition at the gallery in Berlin, and we had a poster up that said, you know, so people knew when they entered the gallery it was AI art. And usually people, like when we've shown Hans Dehlinger, you know, the plotter drawings, and people didn't know it was plotter drawings, but just saw drawings. They were really happy, you know. They came into the gallery, they were happy to see the art. It was very detailed. They loved seeing that and just enjoyed it, and everyone was happy. And, you know, when we've done the AI show, I've never had so many aggressive people at the gallery, because they read the word AI, then they had prejudices, you know, it's not art, like they, you know, just heard so many bad things about AI. And then I very early on started speaking with people, and actually try to figure out what they know about AI, what might make them angry. And then I asked them at some point, well, do you even know how an artist works with AI? And then they were like, no. And then I was like, okay, so do you know what a text to image prompt is? And they didn't know what a prompt is. So they were not aware. And then I started sitting down with people, actually, taking out my laptop. I said, well, do you have a minute? Let's sit down and, try out Stable Diffusion. And then I showed them how it works. And then they actually suddenly were really interested. So I think people at this point don't really know, if they haven't tried out AI at this point or don't read a lot about it or whatever, they are just not aware. And then when it comes to the art, what I've just said about digital art is especially true, I think, also for all of us, because it's so new. What are criteria for good AI art, right? What makes art created with artificial intelligence actually good art? What is a good concept? What is even a concept? And so on and so on. I think that's the hard part when it comes to generative art. That's, I think, sort of clear at this point. Yeah, Caroline agrees that it's hard to write about your own work. Then Dave asked, what would you suggest for artists who have had some career in the in real life art world but have trouble connecting their pre-NFT work to their current post-NFT practice? I mean, my question then would be, do you really have to connect your physical, I assume it's physical artworks in this case, do you really have to connect your sort of physical practice to what you're doing now? Because I was just in a Twitter space with the artist Jonas Lund. So he has I think a 15-year career in the traditional art world, and he basically has a topic, and that's value curation on the art market, and basically his topic is really the creation of value from the perspective of an artist, and then also what that means from an art market perspective. So yeah, in 2018, he released the Jonas Lund token. He turned his artistic practice into a DAO. Jonas was also the artist who made me get my first MetaMask wallet. I was really annoyed when he asked me to download, and I was like, this is so annoying. It's so complicated. No one will ever be able to use it. I had no freaking clue what a seed phrase is, and so on and so on. So I don't know what happened to this wallet. But I think as an artist, I assume you have a topic or questions that interest you, and then I think we're back to concepts and storytelling and having a storyline and a narrative about your own work. I think if you just follow that narrative, then I think it might be a bit easier, or that might actually answer, that it should not be a challenge for you to connect your physical work to what you're doing now with NFTs. Then Carolina asks, is there anyone you read off, not Meier, for their writing as far as art criticism in the Web3 space? I really like Sarah Friend's writing. She's an artist herself. I'm pretty sure you know her. She wrote 2 or 3 fantastic texts about NFTs, and she's someone who basically said, and I 100% agree, NFTs, there's no NFT without the market, period. Because you need an online platform to create an NFT, and that means putting it on the market. That's just a matter of fact. So Sarah Friend and Ria Myers, I have her book at home. It's Blockchain Provocations 2011 to 2021. The book is titled Proof of Work. That one I can highly recommend. So I love reading everything from Ria Myers. And in case you like podcasts, I can highly recommend listening to any podcasts Ria was invited to as a speaker, because they're highly entertaining. She's super smart, funny. It's a pleasure listening to her. And then I think Simon Denny hosts a podcast. Then Dryhurst and Holly Herndon are super smart people. They also write. Then Shimon Bazar is a great writer, very entertaining as well. For me, when I read text, also when I write text myself, I think it's important to, sort of be entertaining. Emily has a question. Could you talk a bit about pricing in this market? I know there's no easy answer that it depends on many areas. Could you speak? Yeah, it's about basically lowering prices to sell and possibly devalue work or maintain value and maybe not sell. Yeah, that's a very, very good question. I think the situation we're in right now in this market has also been caused because when the hype sort of cooled down, and then we saw like the beginning of the bear market, and some collectors started to leave, some dumped their bags, and so on and so on. That's when a lot of people, or many of the collectors, actually moved to Tezos, and also many of the artists who previously hadn't minted work on Tezos also moved to Tezos, and there we had very low prices, right? So you could get brilliant work for like less than 5 Tez. Back then it was like $5 or about $10. And if something was above 10 Tez, then people were like, whew, that expensive. I remember the days when artists, at the beginning of FX hash price their work at like 10 Tez, and there was a drama and a shitstorm. How dare you to price your work at 10 Tez? So I think the situation we're in right now with the market, and collectors being like, ooh, 100 euros a lot, 200 euros a lot, zero point 0.2 ETH is a lot of money. I think that also comes from people just actually trying to find collectors and people to collect their work, which is great. But once you are down with your price, and that's also myself as gallery and as an online platform, I would like to work with as many artists as possible and give them shows and everything. But then we've done shows with artists who have very low prices, and I wanted to give them a chance, exhibit them wherever. Wherever we've done an exhibition, and then the result was they tried to give us work for regular prices, which then also wasn't expensive, just like 100, 200 euro. And what happens? We, as a gallery or an online platform, present these artists, they through us get awareness, and collectors learn about them as emerging artists, and then they just go to their object and collect work there for like 2 tests. Or like 5 tests, right? And I really literally saw that happen with my own eyes. So I guess that's what you need to be aware of. If you price your work low, then if you try to price it higher, you need to take down the cheap work. Otherwise, you won't have a chance to raise your prices. So I think that's very important to keep that in mind. I hope I answered your pricing question. And yeah, the question is also right on the. I mean, if I do, like we've done, as I've just mentioned, we've done the solo show with Hans Dehlinger, right? It's not that we say, oh, we drop 26 plotter drawings now, and if they don't sell, then this exhibition was a failure. No, I know that he has a limited amount of artworks from a certain period in time, and I know I actually can't drop them and just give them to whomever. I would love to do that, but then, at the same time, if you only have a limited number of artworks, then you have to be careful, because there's big private collections who work with museums, for example, right? So I have to take care that the big or even the smaller private collections have a chance of collecting artworks first, because they are the ones who support the artist in getting into museum shows, because they lend artworks to museums and so on and so on. They also, if a museum, for example, is doing a historical exhibition about generative art or early computer art or whatever, they go to these bigger private collections and ask them also for advice. So it's important for an artist to be part of such a collection. So, and that's the interesting part when it comes to selling in the NFT space, right? We are so used to, yes, here's a drop, we release. If it doesn't sell out, it's one big failure. It's stigmatized. We didn't sell. It's horrible. It was a total failure. This platform is not selling. They're so bad. You can't work with them, and so on and so on. And that's, for myself, absurd. It's really absurd to hear that, because also if you have higher priced work, why do you think a person would decide within like, I don't know what, how many minutes to buy an artwork for like 3,000-4,000 euro, especially someone who's not part of the NFT space and not, you know, used to the sort of like supreme drop culture. I think so. Yeah, if you don't sell out immediately, I wouldn't worry, and I also would highly recommend. That's what I can say from us as a platform. You know, there's really new collectors coming to the space, and if they're interested in digital art, they look around. We also, you know, at some point there was a week where we sold NFTs for like 30 or 40K in total, and that was work that was sitting on the platform for like 1 or 2 months. And then, you know, and then I was on the phone with a big fund, and they were like, "What else do you have? What else do you have?" I looked through everything on your platform, and they already spent 10K, and I was like, "This is all I have at this point. You went through everything. I'm very sorry." But yeah, I mean, like, I would recommend don't burn your work even if you didn't sell out, because at some point people will look for it, and you can't expect, you know, if it's then sold out, it was a small edition, and then, you know, you have loyal collectors who would never list your work, then you just don't have anything. And what's also really important, that's also what everyone in the traditional art world recommends, like, don't sell everything. Like, always keep something for yourself. Be it a physical show, like, you know, keep one of the really good pieces for yourself from a drop, you know, make sure you have enough pieces, and so on and so on. I know there's secondary royalties, but still always keep work for yourself. Okay, I hope I answered that question. Let me look. You can also ask questions via the voice channels. I feel like I'm doing one big monologue.
It's you. Yeah, it's you can as well. People might be like doing some, like they might be easier to write. I can also see some familiar faces from other cohorts. So guys, if you want to hop in, please do.
Hey, Anika, do you reckon the Cross Lucid? Hi, I hope you'll be back in Berlin at some point. They left Operator moved to Madrid. Cross Lucid left for the jungle. I feel like I'm alone in Berlin, sort of. No, not really, but guys, come back, please. Hi, Anika, do you reckon there will be more artworks co-created with AI that will find a more physical iteration beyond the screens in the future? Yes, I think so. Yeah, I mean, that will definitely happen. I forgot the name of the artist who showed it at Gagosian and has done sort of like vintage looking sort of photography created with AI. Then we have someone like Kevin Abosch, who has done a massive piece of a calculator that was on view at Art Basel this year, one of the very few, no, I think it wasn't even an NFT, but something from a blockchain artist. And then also Simon Denny, but his metaverse paintings haven't been co-created with AI, I think. But yeah, I think that's definitely going to happen. And then also Sasha Styles, I collect 2 of her physical artworks, a painting and a watercolor piece. I'm pretty happy about that. Yes, I'm pretty sure a lot of paintings and so on, a lot of physical artworks. Yeah, and I think that's also, I have the feeling that people are, you know, they've collected many NFTs, and then how many pretty picture can you actually own, right? Or how many pretty pictures do you need? Because at some point you might have enough pretty pictures in your wallet, and, you know, everyone has a lot of white walls, I assume. I mean, at least I have. So I really, after moving into a new space, and I also said to Cross Lucid, I would love to have one of the prints on my wall. Yeah, I think, like, also always, you know, especially if you do a solo show, right? Then, and in case you would like to have a career in the traditional art world, then, you know, it might not be enough to just have, not to be disrespectful about JPEGs, I love JPEGs, to just have JPEGs on screens, right? So yeah, I think it might be helpful to always sort of like have the physical part in mind when creating art, because you might be invited to a gallery show or show or whatever, and then you would also like to have an answer, you know, or also to collectors. That's also the interesting part. I mean, so many collectors at this point, just because the artist doesn't offer print, they just print the NFT they own. But I think collectors over time, you know, will be really interested in collecting like physical art and prints from artists, because, you know, it's your choice. The paper, like size, framing, in some cases, everything. So I think it might be really helpful to actually think also about, you know, how you would like your digital art to be printed. so that you have an answer for collectors about that topic. Translucid, did that answer your question? I just remembered that I need to go back to the phone and check. Yes, thank you. Hope to see you soon. Any more questions?
It's me again, Anton. So I would like to know about real-time animation created with generative art, generative like coding and GLSL. This is what I'm interested in, but I feel like it's not perceived and welcomed in NFT space, because a lot of people like want to see JPEGs, and it's also like they want their work to be able to be printed, and I feel like sometimes they just don't know what to do with animation that is real time also. So I wanted to ask, is there any way to become somehow closer to collectors, or just people who don't know about it, and also are there any events happening about generative art that is like animation and real time these days? Yeah.
I think the difficult part about live animations is that you need a gaming computer, no, to exhibit the work. I think that's task number one. We've done a show with artists, and they actually wanted me to buy 4 gaming computers, and that would have cost me between 5 and 10K, right? So, and then that's also, I think, I had discussions with them. I think then it's also up to the artist. If your artworks requires that kind of setup, then I think you have to, in the first place, make sure. That's also something that Rafik Anadol does. I mean, his artworks have like very high prices, so for him it's not a problem if collectors spend like, I don't know what amount of money, they actually get a computer from him. So they not only get the NFT, but he gives them a computer. So I think if you have a more complex artwork, then it's also up to you to support the collector and being able to show it at the home. And I think once you are capable of providing that, and then the collector not only spends money on the artwork, but then you tell them, oh, you need this and that, you need a Raspberry Pi, you need whatever to be able to display the work, and that makes it less attractive because it's even more expensive to collect. So.
Yes, sorry, but for example, a lot of our artwork, generative and real life, they are played on mobile phones and any screens. Actually, you don't need any great gaming computer for that, because they're really light and they created with JavaScript and GLSL, which is really not that hard programs to show. So but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what to do about that. Same with AI, right? Everything that is new and not that common. I mean, there was a big, very successful drop yesterday on a platform, and it was Japanese landscapes created with AI. But, it's basically something everyone knows translated into a new medium, and people love that, right? So it's always it's the same when Instagram launched. It was basically they gave people what they already know, right? Something that for them looked like Polaroids. So if you want to invent something new, give people something they already know. So if you do stuff with live animations, it might be easier to convince people if you give them something they already know and are interested in, than just pair it with something they're not that interested in. Then you might get them interested. But if you do something that hasn't been done before, then you can't expect yourself and to be successful, or as successful as something that has been done before. Not sure if that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks. I understand. Yeah, it's always really interesting because uh, we we are all in our bubbles, and we think that we do it every day. We see our fellow artists and friends that we are also a lot of people like my friends. They're interested in this type of animation and artworks, but then when you release it and you see how people react on it, it's very confusing, and yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily has a question and asks, before NFTs, that artists actually had to, in many cases, sustain themselves with doing work for clients, be it brands or just like commercial jobs. And she now asks if there's a stigma around that, doing commercial work. No, I don't think so. I mean, it might be, but there's also maybe, some people don't like pretty pictures, some people don't like AI, some people don't like this, some people think that is wrong. So if you think you need to do something in order to sustain yourself, or you find it, I mean, you also only always should do stuff you find important and interesting for yourself. But yeah, I mean, if you find it is an interesting project, then just because it's a brand job, I mean, why shouldn't you do it? Art is also about taste, same as music. Not everyone likes the same music, so not everyone has to like the same art or think this is the way how to do it and be successful as an artist. There's not that one recipe. And most big artists, out there do brand jobs. So it might be also, you can also say, oh, if a brand reaches out to me, I'm already very successful. Could also be a sign of success, right? And be seen that way. I hope that answered your question. Emily says, thank you.
Just letting everybody know that we have 5 minutes left. So get all your questions in.
Hi, Anika. It's Carolina. I put a question in there. I think it got lost maybe in the mix there, but I was just wondering if you might talk to us a little bit about how you do educate people with AI artwork good, just so that we also have some language to talk about this to people when people ask us, like, why would I want that?
I mean, that's a very good question. What makes an AI artwork good? I think the same as also with photography, right? I mean, and also Anne Spolter speaks about it like this. Everyone has a camera. I mean, for like decades, people have access to cameras, but not everyone is a photographer. Now with smartphones, it just got easier and easier taking photos, but that doesn't make everyone a photographer, right? Just because you have a smartphone and can easily, take great photos. That's the same with AI, right? Everyone can just do write prompts and then get something in return. But it's same as with photography. It's about execution and then concept. And if something is an interesting concept, then you again have to look at the history of art and see if it's a valuable contribution, if it's adding something to the history of, in this case, I would say contemporary art or art and technology. And yeah, I would approach this question from that standpoint and be like, really, also if someone says, oh, art created with AI is not art, because everyone can just do it, then you can say, well, yeah, just because you take photos with your smartphone, you don't think you're a photographer, right? So just because you write prompts doesn't mean you think you're an AI artist. I think it's very easy. Communication is all about winning, but in this case, I think it's very easy to make a point and convince someone. Are there more questions? I think we have like 2 minutes left.
I saw Filippo typing, but I don't know. Let's see. Yeah. Oh no. Oh yeah, there's one from Chris Lucid, or you answered that already? Oh, yeah, actually. We've seen many of the formats and practices of the more traditional art world transplanted to the NFT space. So what formats, mechanics from the NFT space would you wish could transform the workings of traditional art space?
Oh, that's a very good question. I think the work I like most in the NFT space is artists working with concepts such as Simon Daniel, Ria Maya, Sarah Friend, Harm van den Dorpel, Mitchell F. Chan, Kevin A. Bosch, all of these people who have also more of a traditional digital art world background. And I think, yeah, for me, art is mainly about concepts, and I think it's I think it's easier to convince someone from the traditional art world with a good concept, because that's also what they know from traditional art concepts. Yeah. So we need good concepts. Oh, Filippo first heard through me about NFTs on Instagram during the pandemic, and then went down the rabbit hole. I hope that's a good thing. Otherwise, I'm sorry.
Thank you so much, Anika. That was
Thank
great.
you.
And,
Okay, he says it's a good thing. I'm very happy. Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Appreciate it. And thanks, everybody. Great questions.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.